My name is Valerie, and the night everything cracked open started innocently over a quiet family dinner, 20 years after Grandma vanished on her around-the-world trek. She set her fork down, fixed her clear eyes on me, and asked why I was still crammed inside a tiny Brooklyn rental when I'd been gifted a Manhattan studio with a balcony facing the park. And before I could even inhale, my mother let out a nervous laugh and said it belonged to Mason now, while Dad's stare remained glued to his mashed potatoes, and my brother scrolled his phone like the whole conversation was background noise. And in that suspended moment, Grandma's expression didn't flicker. She just dabbed her lips with her napkin and told everyone to finish eating because we were taking a drive. Words that sent my heartbeat hammering as I remembered months of Mom begging me for one last transfer to help Mason through some made-up emergency, and me sending the money because I thought I was protecting the place I still believed I owned, unaware that the real explosion was waiting 45 minutes away on the 20th floor of the building where my life used to begin. The studio Grandma Evelyn had bought for me when I was 16, walking into the closing with her lawyer, paying cash from the sale of Grandpa's warehouse, and placing the deed in my name to keep it clean for the future, making my 18th birthday a small glowing celebration inside an empty living room decorated with white balloons and cake, and a bright red ribbon tied around my new brass keys, while Grandma hugged me tight and told me that no matter what storms came, I would always have a corner of the city that belonged only to me. Then she set off on her journey with a battered suitcase and a grin full of wild freedom, sending postcards from every continent while I built a tiny creative life inside the studio, string lights glowing against the brick wall, my desk tucked under the window, the balcony overlooking Central Park like a private secret. And for years that place felt like magic, until Mason arrived in New York with one duffel bag and a voice full of charm, asking to crash, just for a semester. Reminding me of the kid who used to follow me around barefoot in the backyard, and because I'd sworn to protect him the day he was born, I said yes only for 3 months, but in a blink the air mattress became a bed, the bed became a gamer cave, his friends became permanent shadows, and I became the visitor, cleaning up beer cans before AABM guests arrived. Ignoring the warnings in my gut, while Mom praised me for being such a good sister and Dad kept sending pizza money, and Mason slowly transformed the space into something that no longer felt like mine at all, especially the day I opened the closet and realized every piece of my clothing had been boxed and removed without my permission, Mom texting me afterward as if it were a favor, while the maintenance fees quietly tripled, and she told me she'd handle it, so I could focus on work. And every time Mason had another crisis, car towed, phone cut off, bad beats on his gambling, she nudged me to send more money, and I did, because I believed that protecting the apartment meant protecting an asset that was still legally mine, until one morning the management office called needing my signature on a refinance I never requested, which led me to the city property site where I typed my address and felt my entire world tilt when I saw Mason Edward Brooks listed as owner of record, effective 14 months earlier, my name erased like it had never existed, and before I could even process the betrayal, Grandma returned from her travels and walked straight into the mess, demanding answers over dinner, then driving me into Manhattan that same night, unlocking my old door with a spare key she'd kept all this time. Stepping into a living space thick with beer stench and weed smoke and water damage, confronting Mason and my parents with a folder of forged deeds and fraudulent loans, totaling over $600,000, her voice calm as ice as she asked if I had signed anything, me shaking my head, and then telling me to pack a bag because I was coming with her, leaving everyone else standing in the filthy wreckage they'd created. Her heels echoing down the hallway like judgment itself, while Mom sputtered excuses and Grandma didn't even turn around. The next morning she summoned me to a tiny cafe near the park where she sat beside her sister Clara, a retired Manhattan real estate attorney with the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen, who immediately slid an accordion folder across the table and showed me the forged deed transfer, placing my old driver's license beside the signature to highlight the mismatched loops and wrong angles of a forgery so sloppy it made my throat tighten. Then she walked me through the chain of fraud step by step, explaining how a notary who played golf with my father rubber-stamped the paperwork, how my parents co-signed 2 loans against the property, a $380,000 refinance and a $240,000 home equity line, every dollar routed directly into Mason's gambling accounts at DraftKings, FanDuel and offshore books, all of it now delinquent, foreclosure set in 59 days unless someone paid the full 6-figure balance, and while my vision blurred at the numbers, Grandma calmly closed the folder and reminded me that she had kept every original 2005 document, including the deed in my name and the gift letter, locked in a Swiss safe deposit box untouched and undeniable. And Clara reassured me that forged deeds are void from the moment they're filed, meaning the loan lanes stick to the fraudsters, not to me. And that she had already drafted the quiet title lawsuit and fraud complaint to obliterate every illegal transfer and hold every participant accountable, offering her services for free because she'd never liked how my mother coddled Mason anyway. That same week I hired my own attorney, a litigation bulldog named Lauren Park, and together we filed the suits in New York County Supreme Court, triggering an eruption from my parents who left desperate voicemails accusing me of destroying the family while Mason alternated between apologies and threats, promising he'd pay everything back once he hit the right system. But I blocked them all and focused on the case as Discovery opened a year-long avalanche of bank records. Betting statements, text messages, and financial footprints so devastating they practically confessed for my family. Every screenshot and PDF another knife, twisting into the realization that they hadn't just taken my property. They had been willing to risk prison, bankruptcy, and my entire future to prop up Mason's delusions, and through all of it Grandma stayed steady, calling me every morning, reminding me that justice moves like a glacier but crushes everything in its path. Until finally the evidence towered so high that the bank folded, the notary cracked. And my parents, lawyers started offering settlements before a judge could get involved, and the day the court officially voided the fraudulent deed and restored the apartment to my name, Clara hugged me and said the city never lets liars keep what they steal, while Grandma squeezed my shoulders and whispered that I had survived something meant to break me and that my studio, my anchor, was mine again forever. And as I rode the elevator back to the 20th floor for the first time as its rightful owner, the building smelled like lemon polish the way it used to, and in the silence I felt the ghosts of every postcard Grandma sent me from her travels, each one ending the same way: love you bigger than the sky, keep the balcony light on for me. When the elevator doors slid open on the 20th floor, the hallway felt eerily familiar, like the building itself had paused its breathing the day I left and had only now exhaled, releasing a faint mixture of floor polish old wood and that metallic chill that always settles around long Manhattan corridors. And as I walked toward my door, the weight of the key in my palm felt almost unreal, heavier than memory but lighter than grief, a small piece of brass that had once symbolized hope. Then loss and now reclamation, and when I finally unlocked the door and stepped inside, the studio didn't feel like mine yet. It felt like a place recovering from trauma, walls still exhaling stale smoke, broken blinds hanging crookedly, grease stains ghosting the corners, dried beer rings marking the table, and the faint echo of Mason's chaos still trapped somewhere between the floorboards. But underneath all of that, beneath the rot and the ruin, I felt something else. A pulse, a familiarity, the faint heartbeat of the life I had built here, waiting quietly for me to return. Almost like the apartment itself had been holding its breath for rescue, and the moment I walked to the balcony and pushed open the glass door, the wind rushed in with such force that papers fluttered off the counter like startled birds, the city opening itself below me in one wide, impossible sweep, the park a dark green sea stretching under the dusk light, and I pressed my hands to the cold railing and realized that my life, which had been drifting like a ship without a compass for years, was finally anchoring itself again. But the victory was not clean, because the deeper the silence sank into the apartment, the clearer the guilt became. The guilt of knowing my parents were now drowning in debts they'd created, that Mason's addiction had spiraled into something ugly and ravenous, that the lawsuits had carved permanent cracks through the family's foundation, and that even though they had betrayed me in the most calculated, merciless way, a part of me still mourned the childhood version of us, the version where Mom braided my hair before school, Dad carried me on his shoulders at baseball games, and Mason used to slip me scribbled, secret messages during dinner, messages about forts and planets and imaginary worlds where we were explorers instead of enemies, a grief so heavy it spread across my ribs like cold iron as I walked back inside and sat on the dusty floor, wondering if reclaiming my apartment meant losing my family forever. And that night, instead of sleeping, I scrubbed the kitchen until my fingers burned, ripped down the sticky curtains Mason had pinned with tape, filled 3 trash bags with junk, and opened every window to air the place out, and sometime around 3 in the morning as the city hummed far below, I found a small velvet box wedged behind the radiator, a box I recognized instantly, the one Grandma had given me on my 18th birthday. Containing the tiny gold compass charm meant to remind me that wandering was not the same as being lost, and when I opened it, the charm still sparkled like a soft promise, and suddenly the exhaustion broke into tears I didn't even try to stop, because it felt like the universe, or Grandma, or the apartment itself was telling me that everything taken from me could be rebuilt, and that this place was not just a piece of property, but the spine of my independence. The first thing I had ever owned, the first thing that was ever truly mine. Over the next few weeks I rebuilt the studio piece by piece: fresh paint in a warm almond shade, a new bookshelf, soft linen curtains, a floor lamp with a golden glow that made the evenings feel gentle again, a reclaimed maple desk facing the balcony, the air slowly losing its bitterness as plants and order and intention returned, and life became a strange rhythm of work during the day and restoration at night, while the legal case continued its slow, grinding course in the background. With Lauren calling occasionally to update me about settlement negotiations, bank reversals, and statements from the notary who had finally confessed under pressure. But the real storm hit when my mother called from a number I didn't recognize, her voice hoarse and cracked as she begged me to meet her, just once, claiming she wanted to explain, and against every instinct I had I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because closure for wounds, this deep, sometimes requires staring the pain directly in the eye. So I met her on a quiet bench near the park, where she sat hunched like she had aged 15 years in the span of one, her hands trembling as she admitted that they hadn't planned to steal everything at first, that it started as a temporary shuffle of paperwork to help Mason get a loan he couldn't qualify for, and then the gambling debts grew too fast, the forgeries became too easy. And eventually they convinced themselves that I didn't need the apartment anyway, because I was always working, always moving, always strong enough to rebuild, while Mason was fragile and vulnerable and in danger of collapsing. And listening to her rationalize the destruction of my financial future in the name of saving my brother felt like swallowing broken glass, because every word proved that somewhere along the line they had rewritten me into the villain of their story, successful enough to exploit, stable enough to drain, resilient enough to sacrifice, and for the first time in my life I felt a clean, decisive boundary click into place inside me, something cold and resolute and irreversible, and when she reached out to hold my hands, I pulled mine back and told her that forgiveness without accountability is just permission to hurt me again, and that I hoped she healed, but I would not be returning to the version of family we once were. I walked away before she could answer, the wind rising sharply as if the city itself was sealing the door behind me, and when I returned to my studio, the sun had already dipped behind the skyline, leaving the room washed in quiet gold, and for the first time in months the space felt not just reclaimed but sacred, solid. Something I could build a life on without fear that someone would yank the ground out from under me again, and as I sat at my desk with the balcony door cracked open, listening to the distant hum of taxis and the soft rustle of leaves in the park, I realized that survival wasn't the end of this story. Rebirth was, and slowly, quietly, with the city glowing like a constellation beneath me, I began writing the next chapter of my life from the exact place where the last one had been stolen. I didn't even realize my knees had gone weak until the hallway wall pressed into my shoulder, the cool paint grounding me for a second as my senses tried to catch up with the wave of panic hitting all at once. And while I stood there trying to steady my breathing, the muffled hum in the house seemed to grow louder. Like the walls themselves were waiting for me to notice something I had failed to see before, so I pushed myself upright, swallowing the dryness in my throat, and moved slowly toward the living room, each step feeling heavier than the last, my mind racing with questions I was afraid to let form fully. If Mason had been hiding this part of himself so carefully, what else had he buried under those easy smiles and late-night reassurances? What other versions of him had been living parallel to the one I knew? The room felt colder than it should have, almost like someone had left a window cracked open, and as I crossed the floorboards I noticed the faintest tremble in my hands, a residual shake from hours, maybe years, of pretending everything was fine, and when I reached the edge of the rug I stopped because something felt off. The placement of the picture frames on the shelf, the angle of the lamp, the thin layer of dust disturbed slightly on the console table, as if someone had brushed past it not too long ago, small anomalies that wouldn't matter to anyone else but sent a ripple of unease straight through me, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like the house wasn't empty the way I had assumed, like there was a presence lingering just out of sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I forced myself to turn on the overhead lights, even though the brightness stabbed at my already throbbing temples, and in that glare I saw the envelope on the coffee table. A plain beige envelope I definitely hadn't seen earlier, sitting squarely in the center as though placed with intention, and my heart dropped into a dull, heavy beat against my ribs as I stepped closer, the silence in the room thickening around me with every inch I closed. Until I finally stopped in front of it and stared at my name written across the front in a handwriting I recognized instantly. My grandmother's, shaky but unmistakable, looping in the same style she used on my birthday cards when I was little, which made no sense because she had passed away 2 years ago, long before Mason's secret spiraled into the chaos now swallowing my life. My breath froze in my chest, and for a moment all I could do was stare, caught between disbelief and a rising instinct that I shouldn't touch it, that opening it would shatter whatever illusion of safety I still clung to. But curiosity and dread twisted together in a way that made standing still impossible, so I reached out, slowly like the envelope might burn me, and lifted it with trembling fingers, feeling the weight inside, something thin and stiff, maybe a photograph or a folded letter. And my pulse quickened so sharply, it almost hurt as I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. As soon as the paper inside rustled, a chill rolled across the back of my neck, the kind you feel when someone stands too close behind you even though no one is there, and I turned instinctively, scanning the dim corners of the room, the doorway, the shadows layered like quiet watchers, but everything was still, no movement, no sound except my own ragged breath echoing in my ears, so I turned back and pulled the letter free, unfolding it carefully, and that's when I saw it. A single-page note, written in the same trembling handwriting as the name on the envelope, the ink slightly smudged as if touched by unsure fingers, and the first line knocked the air straight out of my lungs, because it didn't start with a greeting or a memory like my grandmother would have done. It started with a warning. If you're reading this, then someone in that house is not who you think they are. And my grip tightened so hard on the paper it crinkled loudly in the silence, yet I forced myself to keep reading even though each word felt like a step further into a darkness I wasn't prepared for, every sentence drawing an invisible line between the past I thought I understood and the truth I had never even considered existed. And the next lines only tightened the knot in my stomach because my grandmother wrote with a certainty that felt impossible, as if she had seen something long before any of us did. You will be tempted to confront him. Do not. He is already watching for your reaction. My eyes tracked every shaky stroke of ink, unable to look away even as dread pooled in my chest, and the more I read, the more the room seemed to shrink around me. She went on to describe nights when she heard quiet footsteps outside her window long after everyone was asleep, nights when the locks she triple-checked before bed were mysteriously undone by morning, nights when she felt a presence standing in the hallway as she pretended to sleep, details she never told anyone, not even my mother, because she feared being dismissed as an old woman losing her mind. But she wrote that the footsteps stopped only after Mason left for college, and that she prayed she was wrong about what she suspected, prayed the unease was just her imagination. But the eyes he had, she wrote, were not the eyes of a boy who slept peacefully. My heartbeat hammered so loudly it drowned out everything else, because suddenly it felt like my grandmother hadn't just been warning me, she had been trying to reach across time, trying to tell me that the danger didn't begin with what I discovered about Mason. It had roots much deeper, roots that had been growing long before I ever had a chance to see them.